Now what about the seafood and the estuaries west of the river? Well, let's take a look at the oyster reefs above Grand Isle, Louisiana, in Barataria Bay. I do not have high hopes for what the samples may contain because we sampled fresh oil on several occasions in this area in 2010. These oil sampling locations are marked here by the red dots and is extremely significant because these areas contain very prolific oyster beds. Also, LSU has an oyster hatchery based out of Grand Isle, Louisiana. This scientific research facility was in the direct line of fire of the BP oil spill. This is a sample of the BP oil that was collected from Barataria Bay in 2010. And this is what it looks like under the UV light. And again from another angle. And please note the bright blue color down here at the bottom. I believe this is dispersed oil. Now these are a part of an oyster sample that was taken in the northeast edge of Barataria Bay in the spring of 2011. The shells are over 6 months old and mostly dried out, but I would like to see what they look like under the UV light. And here it is. Yep, looks like there is some fluorescence there, which means there is a possibility for hydrocarbon contamination. Notice I said a possibility. After all, this is just a screening tool. Further investigation is warranted, especially considering the amount of oil that we saw entering this zone in 2010. If this was 2010, what about 2011? What would the samples look like at this point? Well, we did return in August of 2011 to an area called Bay Jimmy, which is at the northern edge of Barataria Bay. And what we came across was not a pretty sight. Again, we find dispersed oil at the surface. Where is it coming from? We're not sure at this point. All that I can say is that it was a very significant slick that extended well into Bay Jimmy, which is the northern bank of Barataria Bay. Upon seeing this, I began to worry for the fate of our marshes and our estuaries and our oyster beds, and of course our seafood, which is scary considering the amount of product that comes out of these areas. Now let's take a quick look at some of these oyster samples that came from Bay Jimmy in August of 2011. Under the UV light you will see that these mussels are glowing as if they have hydrocarbon contamination. Likewise, looks like these oysters may have also picked up some of the hydrocarbons. Now these are shots of the oil that was on the bottom of our boat at the end of the day of visiting Bay Jimmy and pushing up onto the bank in August of 2011. This tar-like residue was stuck to the bottom of the boat and not easy to remove. Please note this bare spot here. This is where I have wiped the hull clean as I could get it with a dynamic absorbent cloth, which is designed to capture the hydrocarbons. This is the cloth under regular light, and this is the cloth under the UV light. And there it is, that brownish pastel orange color that is the telltale for hydrocarbon. This isn't that surprising when you consider what the soil from Bay Jimmy looks like under the UV light. And this is it. Here is the soil under regular light, and here is the soil under UV light. Not surprising what turned up on the bottom of the boat now. What about even further westward, let's say Terrebonne Parish below Cocodrie? Surely these oysters are protected from the oil spill. These oysters were harvested near Cocodrie, Louisiana in August of 2011. And these are the same oysters under the UV light. Looks like they've picked up some of the orange fluorescence also. This seed oyster here is probably less than a year old, and this is what it looks like under the UV light. Looks like it's laying down some interesting new shell layers. This commercial size adult oyster is also laying down some interesting fluorescent colors at its beak where it grows new shell. These are the same oysters except shucked this time. And under the UV light, they also show signs of potential hydrocarbon contamination. However, these oysters don't seem to look as bad as the ones that we harvested from east of the river, which is as we would expect it to be. But pictures like these still alarm me. However, I am still not surprised, because these are some pictures of a freshly dispersed oil slick that we sampled 20 miles south of Cocodrie in September of 2011. This cappuccino-like dispersed oil slick was 10 miles wide. The smell of aromatic hydrocarbons was so thick in the middle of this slick that I became ill shortly after entering it, and vomited overboard until we departed the area. Now please remember, this is over a year after they supposedly capped the well, and over 80 miles west of the Macondo Deepwater Horizon blowout.